Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Without getting too far ahead of ourselves, congratulations Fernando Alonso, 2023 World Drivers' Champion for the last 6 years in a row. The leader of the FP2 session in the season opener has gone on to win the World Championship that year. Fernando Alonso led FP2 today. Saying he's going to win anything is probably still going a little bit too far, but nonetheless, Aston Martin look very good in both one-lap pace and also in the long-run data we shall see here in a second, with every other top team having their issues. Red Bull had problems today, as did Ferrari, most certainly Mercedes as well. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always. First of all, drama as always in Formula 1 with Hamilton deciding, you know what, the FIA don't care about what you say about freedom of speech, don't care what you say about the jewellery, so he wore the rainbow helmet again, and also they refused, or Hamilton basically refused to confirm that he'd complied with the self-scrutineering, i.e. he didn't take his piercings out, because I think they say there's some risk of, disfigurement if one of these piercings was to be removed. The FIA eventually said, you know what, Hamilton, whatever, you win this round, and they then confirmed they're going to take no further action on this. So I imagine that Hamilton, and hopefully this jewellery cycle would be put to bed and Hamilton could do what he wants, and the FIA say, okay, whatever, we're not going to stop you type thing. So that started off the day, but then of course we actually went into the sessions. Now FP1 was pretty interesting, of course. It was in the hotter part of the day where the track is going to be, well, hotter and therefore slower, tyres overheat, all that type of stuff. Generally it was longer runs in. Not too many drivers did any sort of race simulation in this session, but it was Perez P1, Alonso P2, Verstappen P3, but Verstappen had quite a few problems in this session with car balance and other issues that Red Bull will have to deal with and still weren't fully solved by the end of the day. They were getting better for Verstappen and Red Bull, but they were far from completely solved compared to what they looked like in testing, where they were miles ahead of their competition. In the long runs, they still might be, but in one lap pace, it's very competitive right now according to the data we had, certainly in FP2. So FP1 was Perez, Alonso, Verstappen, Norris was P4, so yeah, with the McLaren up that far probably goes to show that this wasn't too representative. Who knows, maybe McLaren are actually pretty good. But those were the top 10 in FP1, and obviously Mercedes were commenting on this as well, actually, like Shov was giving his thoughts on the fact that, yeah, they've solved the bouncing, but they've still got issues with balance and other problems with the car, that it just isn't so competitive right now. How far they are away from the Red Bull in one lap pace, maybe not too far. In the long run pace though, it's difficult to say again from FP2, the long runs they did towards the end, because they were quite a way off, but who knows about fuel load and all these other factors that are in play, and also what tyres are going to be used. Mercedes struggled in FP1 on the medium tyre. They bolted a new set on thinking they'd unlock more performance, but they were still about half a second away from what Ferrari were doing on that same medium compound tyre. Maybe that's a tyre warm-up thing, who exactly knows. They were expecting to find more performance there, especially because come race day, we're probably going to see the higher tyre a lot. That's what the commentators seem to be suggesting, is that the C1 tyre, the slightly grippier but still durable version of last year's hard tyre, is being used here, and it's going to be a pretty good time more than likely for race day. And I think teams are going to be one-stopping this. I can even see a hard soft strategy potentially working if Mercedes don't like the medium tyre. A hard medium also probably will be viable as well, but we don't really see too much so far of the teams on that harder compound to actually see how competitive they will be in the long runs on that compound. But Mercedes, the harder the tyre gets, they don't seem so good right now, whereas last year their race pace was actually where they were pretty good on the W13 compared to qualifying. So Mercedes have their problems to solve, but FP2 was Fernando Alonso's show yet again. The first driver to get into the 130s, at least in practice. Of course, last weekend it was happening, but that was with the C4 and the C5 tyres, even softer compounds to the C3 tyre, which is the soft compounds for this particular weekend. So Alonso with a 130.9, purple in the first and third sectors. Verstappen was purple middle sector, and Alonso sticks it P1 on the quali simulation laps for, that is absolute madness, and it's very exciting because we saw what Alonso was capable of last time out in the testing. Aston Martin were looking very good, but how competitive they were, Red Bull still feel like, okay, Aston are a little bit behind, but over the one lap situation they had today, Alonso was cooking, and Aston Martin have got something special in order. These were the timing classifications, by the way, about halfway through the session. We'll look at what happened at the end here in a second, but just look how close these cars are. I imagine actually this is probably replicated, so you might as well look at it right about now. Alonso P1 with a 130.9, Verstappen P2, Perez P3, separated by 0.02 of a second, the two Red Bulls, and they were, about a tenth and a half of what Alonso was capable of in the Aston Martin. Stroll was P6. Stroll was having a hard time though, because he's obviously not fully recovered at all. I saw some images of him struggling to even get out of the car after the session, and I do wonder whether Dragovic might have to come in for the rest of the weekend. We'll see on that one. Obviously, he wants to race. I'm sure his dad wants him to race because the car's good at the moment. But, I mean, he was struggling in turn 1 with, obviously, turn 1, pretty tight turn, moving your hands all the way to where they need to be to turn the wheel. Like, that was really causing him some pain. He had to take his left hand off the wheel and, like, push the wheel over with his left hand. So, that was compromising his line through turn 1, that was affecting his run through turn 2, which loses him time all the way down to turn 4. And I'm sure it was an issue at other corners around the track as well at times. So Alonso had a big margin against Stroll as expected. But yeah, Charles Leclerc, P4 in the Ferrari. I think Sainz had a bit of a bad second lap on his second quali sim, so he was way off the pace. But then Haas, P4, or P5, sorry, only 4/10 off. So we have 8 cars within 6/10 of a second. Now, this is probably optimistic thinking in terms of how competitive it's going to be come race day or come qualifying day tomorrow. But still, an Aston Martin, a Red Bull, a Ferrari, a Haas, an Alpine, a Mercedes, a McLaren, and an Alfa, all within 7/10 of a second. Like, that's pretty exciting. Now, we don't know engine modes, we don't know fuel loads, this type of stuff, but nonetheless, that is pretty spicy in terms of what the season could look like. Red Bull might, and I still feel like they probably will be miles ahead in race pace, but in terms of quali pace, this is very exciting. Now, Red Bull had their fair share of issues. Verstappen was on the radio complaining about a lot of things. He said the car's jumping around way more than it was in testing, and they were struggling to understand exactly why. During FP1, there were some discussions here that, especially Max Verstappen's car, there was about 6/10 off what Perez was able to do, and Verstappen was being like, he was pretty much purple or very fast in the first 2 sectors during FP1, but in the final sector, he was falling off massively and often would just give up on the lap, basically. So apparently there was some strange behavior in the slower speed corners. Max and Checo had the same setup, but in the slow corners, the difference is noticeable. The car doesn't behave like it did in pre-season. Do wonder if this is maybe, of course, the Bahrain curse, right? If you win the first race, you go on to lose the championship or come second in the championship, as has happened for the last 6 years. Like, Verstappen will obviously be looking to break that, and maybe losing in Bahrain is the way to do it. But apparently Red Bull experimented with the setup on the front axle. That setup experiment failed, and they wanted to put the car back to the way it was in testing, where the Red Bull looked so good the entire time, but they were still having issues. Verstappen goes back to that setup and then comes on the radio and says, this is really terrible, SHIT, etc., etc. Demonetization and all that. YouTube's way too harsh on it nowadays, in my opinion, but whatever. Have to blow it out, but you know what he said. So, look, Verstappen's car is obviously very good, but he still wants the absolute maximum out of it, and whatever setup they had was not working well. Lack of grip, going wide in the final corner. So I think on the long runs, it was looking much better for Verstappen, and I think the Red Bull in general is looking mighty in those, in those kind of race conditions. But in terms of one lap pace and maximizing the car, they don't seem quite as planted. And Brundle said on commentary that he doesn't feel like the Red Bull is quite as on rails as it seemed to be last time out in testing, and for what everyone was saying. So Red Bull have some problems to solve, and even Helmut Marko went on to say, yeah, there's some issues here. There were some slower corner issues the teams were having, and that meant, though, the Fernando Alonso P1, and as I say, that is the record right now for the last 6 years in a row. The driver that's topped FP2 has gone on to win the championship, and look, I don't think it's going to happen with Alonso being able to maintain at the level they're currently at, which does seem to be quite high throughout the season, is going to be an almost impossible challenge against the resources the other teams have that Aston Martin don't yet have. But the idea that Alonso could be competitive this weekend is incredibly exciting, and they certainly seem ahead of Mercedes. I don't know where they are compared to Ferrari, but they certainly seem stronger than Mercedes at the present time. Now, there's another update here coming out of the grid, and maybe this is just, or from the paddock, sorry, maybe this is just wishful thinking on behalf of the paddock. The paddock just meaning word on the street amongst teams and engineers and staff on the side of the grid. Now, as apparently what they believe is that Red Bull might have to increase their ground clearance. So I believe Mercedes have either been able to lower it a bit, I think Ferrari were able to lower it a bit today, and Red Bull, teams think that Red Bull can't run their car as low as they did in testing for an entire season because they reckon the plank will just wear too much. That's what Mercedes and Toto Wolff said last time out in testing, right? He said, look, if we ran our car that low to the ground, our underbody would just straight up break. So teams seem to think that Red Bull might have to increase the ground clearance over time, which would cost them downforce and give them a bit more drag. Now, Red Bull have denied this and said this isn't true, don't know what you're talking about. But of course, it's not like Red Bull have never denied something that turns out to be true. See Cost Cap Saga 2022, for example. So we'll see. Teams, maybe this is wishful thinking from my perspective, right? The teams are like, oh, Red Bull can't be this good. Surely not. They must, they must have to raise their ride height and cost performance. Maybe they will. Maybe they can find a workaround, or, Red Bull say this is completely not true and there's nothing behind this. But we'll see right over the course of the season whether any of this comes true. But even without doubt this if it's not true, Aston Martin right now are competitive. Now, in terms of straight line speeds, Mercedes, of course, brought in their wing upgrade or their newer version of the wing, and that meant that they're very competitive in terms of a straight line with the Red Bull 323, Ferrari 322, Mercedes 321, and that the other teams are in and around that ballpark as well in a straight line. Now, this is very interesting to look at. So these are the race simulations towards the end of the session. The Red Bull is so good in these type of situations. The tyre wear seems to be basically non-existent. These were Verstappen's times 37.6, 37.1, 36.9, 37.1, 36.8, so a little bit all over the place, but the last few laps, apart from the back-off lap, were very consistent. The average of these are 137.2. Now, Alonso started out his race sim on the soft for 10 laps much faster, so maybe there's a bit more tyre take in place here. But on average, Alonso did a 36.2, 36.4, 36.7, 37.1, and then 2.55, and then dropped into the 138s, then kind of, well, a bit up and down for the rest of it. But on average, again, a 137.24. Verstappen was a 137.22. So comparing the basically the 10-12 lap stints between Verstappen and Alonso, they were almost identical on average. Now, the Red Bull is probably still better and probably has better tyre degradation, but nonetheless, right, the fact that Alonso can even be that close is quite remarkable, because none of the other teams can get close to this. What Verstappen was able to do here, the Ferrari, they have more deg, the Mercedes aren't there either. So, you know, Alonso is the only man right now that can match the Red Bulls, which is quite something. And Ferrari have had their issues as well. They tried again this one strut, I guess, rear wing that they believe is going to be more efficient in a straight line, but the wing was like flexing all around a bit, and they reckon it's going to come back, this wing, but they've had to bin it off for this weekend because it's got too many issues associated with it. There was even a couple issues that Leclerc was having with the clutch, which I think they said they solved. But yeah, that's pretty much going to do it for today, right? But just to share you guys this information I mentioned right at the start of the video, that, well, Hamilton in 17, 18, 19, 20, Verstappen in 21, 22 has led FP2 and then got on to win the championship. So we shall see, but, you know, wishful thinking, I imagine, for the competitiveness of the grid. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.